So today we'll discuss what are stateful services. So as you know, like REST services are normally stateless, but during your work you might get a chance to you might come across a situation where RESTful services are stateful. So in that case, how will you proceed? What will be your approach? How will you automate the services? This we'll discuss today. So basically the definition of stateful service is it maintains client session data between multiple requests, and the server remembers previous interaction with the same client. Some of the common examples will be like banking applications that track login sessions, or shopping carts, or online booking systems. Legacy SOAP systems using JSON like JSESSIONID or session cookies. And how this state is maintained? It is maintained through cookies using JSESSIONID. Normally you get that in your browser Chrome DevTools networking section. If you just open, you will see cookies and JSESSIONID. And the difference between stateless services is that server memory there is no server memory for stateless, and session persistence, like each request independent, and for example REST-GET APIs. These are the normal differences, but if we talk about say stateful services, so it normally uses cookie, as we mentioned, JSON ID, JSESSIONID, and it normally uses through multiple requests. So whenever it sends a request, it normally uses the same JSESSIONID every time. Okay, so visual diagram will be like once a server request sent for login, let's say you are trying to launch a website, a JSESSIONID will be created, and now the same server will send another request using the same JSESSIONID that was sent earlier, created earlier, that returns the data. And the most critical part will be how will you automate these kind of stateful services? What will be approach? So basically approach will be you perform a login API and browser login via Selenium, or you can use BDD also, Cucumber BDD, extract and store the JSON-ID, okay, and then you can basically integrate this in your BDD framework by storing the session in a shared context or static variable, and reuse across the feature files. Now the best practice will be Cucumber login. Let's say you relog in if the session expires. In case the session expires, you log in again. Handle concurrent users with unique sessions, and then prefer token-based auth for modern REST design. So the usual flow will be first you automate the login API, extract the JSON ID, and then pass the next API calls and validate the response. So we'll go through the code, and we'll discuss in detail like how to automate this REST API, okay, using JSESSIONID. So let's get started, guys. So I have my IntelliJ open, so we'll get started. So let's say this is a feature file for I'll be using Cucumber BDD, so we can just write the feature definition like stateful API validation for let's say any login API, something login service can be, or maybe user profile service. I'm just giving some dummy value to show you how to work on this. Now, as you know, in Cucumber we normally use a background keyword, right? So it basically uses the common steps, for example login. So you can use login, and then you can say given user, you know, right? Cucumber normally uses given when then format in a gherkin syntax. So normally we use the given when then format. Given user is on we will use scenario. So this is a very basic level of feature file for automating a REST API. And here I am going to extract the JSession ID from the from the UI login, and then I'll be using this for automating the user profile API. So now to generate step definition, you just have to run this test runner, Cucumber test runner JUnit 4 to create the step definition content. So we just copy the step definition content and paste in the step file. So you can import the classes for an annotation. Done. So now just remove this irrelevant text. Okay, so now you have the step definition. Now you can write your content. So let's say you have placed the REST API content URLs in your, let's say, config files. You can just call config reader, okay, and then like this, and then you can also call your properties file. And then, so these are basically the files that you need to read your properties file. And then you can also these are not very relevant, so if you may or may not create. So if you just want to test it, you can just put the URLs in the step file itself, not needed. So you just create a request specifications. I'm using REST assured request specification io.rest assured. Okay. Now you can also create one public variable. Let's say public static string JSession ID. So you need this. So now in a given request, you can write like this. Let's say, so you can just say Chrome driver new Chrome driver, and then driver dot get. This is basically to launch the, let's say you want to launch any of the URL based on the project which you're working. Let's say I'm just launching some URL and I want to store the JSession ID from there. So you will launch like this, and then you can just create a variable here. Let's say cookie JSession cookie, okay, is equal to null. So basically you want to store the cookie from the browser. Okay. And normally Selenium itself provides a package or a class called cookie, so you can use that. And then you can just say WebDriver you can just say if driver is not equal to null, so I'm assuming that driver is not null, and then I'm just calling my JSession cookie variable which I've created. Okay. Driver dot and then manage dot get cookie name. So this is the this is basically the abstract class that will basically has the JSession ID. So you can just um, copy this, retrieve the JSession ID. Okay, and then you can also mention like if JSession cookie is not equal to null, then you can just mention like string. So anyways, I have created a JSession ID variable here, static variable, so I'll be using that. Okay, it's equal to dot get value. So I am just storing the value which I am getting after the login session, as after the browser is launched. Okay, and then you can just print like normally sys out. You can just print like JSession ID from UI. You can just mention like this, and then you can for log related things you can use log4j, or I'm just showing like how you should be doing this. Okay, and you can return the JSession ID. So for that you need to create a function, let's say public. You can return the, you can create a separate function, or you can return the JSession ID. So anyway, I'm creating a static variable which you can use it. So now you can put else condition here, and you can just mention JSession ID cookie not found. Okay, that's how you can do it. If you're creating a separate function, you can just use like this, and you can create a separate function by creating one more class, and then you can just copy and create a function and then return the cookie or value by creating a small function. Okay, and now we have written this. Now the next step will be to retrieve to incorporate this JSON ID into the API. So we have to create a request. So now how will you do that? Now you can just try. Then I have already created a request specification here, request specification variable. So this request specification is actually coming from io.restassured specification, and it's basically interface. Okay, so I'll form a request to hit the API. So it will be given. You can import the static method given, and then you can just say cookie. Okay, there you can just mention JS session ID. Now the JSession ID which you have retrieved from the browser, you can pass it here to form your request, and you can just mention. So this is a normal format which you normally create to form a request in REST assured. So you can return just given. So this is the request formation, because API request this stateful API for the REST will normally require only JSON ID, unless there is a specific requirement like you have to pass some other parameters. Normally it works only by passing the JSON ID, and you normally retrieve that from browser login. Okay, now just close the catchy block also. Okay, so we are done here. So you have to use, now here we are forming a request, so it won't be void. Okay, so you need to make it request specification. Okay, and return null. Okay. So this is how you will form request. So it will form a request. Now you have to pass this request to the user call. So basically sorry, I made a mistake, friends. So this will come here. You can put it here, because here I'm forming the request, and this block will come here. So we can just mention as driver, make it a global variable. Okay, and then so that's it. Okay, done. Yes, so as I mentioned that when you're forming a request, it has to be request specification, and that's it. So now our request is formed. Now we'll work on the response part. So now response part, how it will work. So basically if you have mentioned your URLs or REST endpoints in the config reader, so you can basically call your config reader variable that you created. Okay, new config reader. I'm just showing it to you in case you are working. Normally these are best practices. We normally keep all the URLs and connection strings in the config.properties file. So this is the best practice, friends. You can just utilize it, and then you can just say properties is equal to In case you have created a method, we can just call that. So these are not very important. This is not mandatory, so I'm just showing it to you. You can just call the methods. Okay. So I'm just showing it to you, config underscore properties. So let's say mm, you have created a config properties file. You can just call this. Okay. Now you can just mention base URI. So as I mentioned, I have created a so you can basically this base URI is coming from REST-assure.class. It's an inbuilt variable, friends, public static string base URI. So you can use that to form your base URL. So you can just mention something like this: properties dot let's say get property. Okay, and then you can just mention the service name. There's a user profile. Okay, that's how you do it. So this user profile has to be in the config.properties file where you have stored your URL, base URL. Okay, then you can just create a response that is for IO REST assured. You have to get the response from the API. So you have to create a response object. Okay, so here I'm calling the base URL. Okay, now you can also here you can concatenate the endpoint. So this is your base URL, plus you can just mention user profile is your endpoint, is your API endpoint. You can mention that. That's how you basically form the API URL, complete API URL, and then you are calling this base URI to get the response. Now you can just mention like response body. So it's basically a REST assured interface which normally prints the responses. So form which normally get the responses from the request. So you got the body here. So you got the response body from the response. Now and then you can just print this response body dot pretty print. You can print the response body. So that's how we normally check, friends. So once you get the response, you can print the response, and also you can print the like response dot status code. Yep. So this should be 200. For if the response is successful, you should be getting this. So here main thing that we need to remember is we have to basically create a method that will basically store the JSession ID once the browser is launched using this getCookie named method. It's like a abstract class, okay, and it will have the JSession ID. Now this JSession ID will be used to form the request, API request, get request, but like this, given cookie when, and this request will give you the response, okay, by forming a base URL plus the API endpoint. You use a response body to get the response of the API, and you can print the response using pretty print and get the status code. So that's normally this is the way we normally work, friends. So in a in summary, like you first launch browser, okay, and get the JSession ID, then pass the JSession ID to the API, and then integrate this with the Cucumber BT step file and feature file. So you can store JSession ID in a static class, which normally I haven't done here. You can create a separate static class, and you can create a detailed method to store the JSession ID, okay, and you can use thread local or context objects between the steps, okay, and so this is a main challenge for stateful APIs, friends, because you have to frequently refresh the browser to make sure this JSON ID is refreshed. Otherwise, there is a chance that this JSON ID, once you create it, it might get timeout after 30 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. So you have to keep your browser active to make sure that this JSON ID is also active. That's the main challenge for this automating stateful APIs. Otherwise, I would say REST APIs are stateless, so it won't be difficult for normal automation of the REST APIs. So thanks, friends. So I hope this session is useful for you, so you can implement this in your project work. So thank you very much, friends. Have a great day.